There's a version of history we're taught in school. It's clean, structured, progressive. Science advances. Medicine improves. Humanity learns from its mistakes. But that isn't the full story. Because hidden inside modern history are moments when science didn't protect people. It used them. Real experiments. Real victims. Real consequences. And the most disturbing part? Many of these didn't happen in some distant medieval past. They happened in the 20th century. Let's start with one that lasted 40 years. The Tuskegee syphilis study in 1932. In Alabama, 600 men were recruited for what they were told was free medical treatment. They were poor. Many couldn't afford health care. They trusted the doctors. What they weren't told was that 399 of them already had syphilis, and the government wasn't planning to cure them. The purpose of the study was to observe what would happen if the disease was left untreated. The men were never properly informed. They were never given real consent. Then, in the 1940s, penicillin became the standard cure. It worked, but the researchers still didn't treat the men. They actively prevented some of them from receiving treatment elsewhere. The study continued for decades. Some of the men died. Some passed the disease to their wives. Children were born with complications. It wasn't until 1972, 40 years later, that a whistleblower exposed the study. Public outrage followed, but by then, the damage was done. Now here's something even more unsettling. What happens when you don't inject disease into people? You just give them power. The Stanford Prison Experiment. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo created a mock prison in the basement of Stanford University. 24 college students volunteered. They were randomly assigned roles, prisoner or guard. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks. Within days, things spiraled. The guards began enforcing strict rules, then harsher ones, then humiliating punishments. The prisoners became withdrawn, anxious. Some showed signs of emotional breakdown. One had to be released after only 36 hours. By day 6, the experiment was shut down, not because the data was complete, but because it had become dangerous. These weren't criminals. They were ordinary students. And yet, placed in a system of authority and control, their behavior changed rapidly. It forced the world to confront an uncomfortable truth. Under certain conditions, cruelty doesn't require monsters. It requires structure. But some experiments went far beyond psychological studies. Some crossed into territory that feels almost unreal. Unit 731. During World War II, the Japanese military operated a secret research unit in occupied China known as Unit 731. Officially, it was for disease prevention. In reality, it conducted biological and medical experiments on prisoners. Infectious diseases were deliberately introduced to study progression. Environmental stress tests were performed to observe how the human body reacted to extreme conditions. It wasn't a hidden rogue operation. It was funded, structured, organized. After the war, many of those involved were granted immunity by foreign governments in exchange for research data. Some went on to have respected careers. The victims never received justice in court. For decades, much of it was denied or minimized. Now let's move to something closer to home. Not war, not foreign occupation, but something carried out in hospitals. The MKUltra program. In the 1950s and 60s, the CIA launched a secret project known as MKUltra. Its goal? To explore mind control techniques during the Cold War. Researchers experimented with LSD and other psychoactive substances. In some cases, individuals were given these drugs without their knowledge or consent. Hospitals, universities, even prisons were involved in different parts of the program. The idea was to see if behavior could be manipulated, if memory could be erased, if control could be achieved. Many documents were destroyed in the 1970s, so we may never know the full scope. But what we do know is that people were used as test subjects in psychological experiments they never agreed to, and it was authorized at the highest levels. Now here's one that often gets overlooked. Because it wasn't secret, it was legal. The eugenics movement in the early 20th century, eugenics was considered legitimate science. The idea was simple and dangerous. Improve society by controlling who could reproduce. Across the United States and parts of Europe, forced sterilization laws were introduced. People labeled as unfit, often the poor, disabled, or mentally ill, were sterilized without proper consent. Tens of thousands were affected, and it wasn't fringe. It was supported by universities, politicians, and courts. In 1927, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld forced sterilization in the case Buck v. Bell. The ruling included the phrase, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough." It would take decades before these laws were widely overturned, but the consequences lasted lifetimes. Now pause for a second. Notice a pattern? These weren't chaotic, underground crimes. They were structured, funded, defended as necessary at the time, and that's what makes them disturbing. Because they weren't carried out by fictional villains. They were conducted by educated professionals, doctors, scientists, officials, often believing they were serving progress. But here's something important. These events didn't just fade away. They changed the world. After World War II, the Nuremberg Code was established. It set ethical standards for human experimentation. Voluntary consent became essential. Later came institutional review boards, medical ethics committees, strict research protocols. These safeguards exist because of the harm that happened before. Modern medicine and research are heavily regulated today. But history reminds us that oversight only exists because it was once absent. So why talk about this? Not for shock value, not for outrage, but for awareness. Because progress without ethics is dangerous. Authority without accountability is dangerous. And history shows us that harm often begins quietly, with justification, with rationalization, with the belief that the outcome matters more than the individual. The question isn't whether humanity is capable of doing this again. History already answered that. The real question is whether the safeguards we've built are strong enough, and whether we pay attention when those safeguards are tested. Because the line between research and exploitation is thinner than people like to admit. If you found this unsettling, that's probably the point. History isn't just about what happened. It's about what we learn from it, and what we refuse to repeat.